from the city that never sleeps. 17 miles from Madison Square Garden, New York City. It's America at Night with Rich Valdez, America's favorite late-night talk program, featuring interesting guests from around the world and calls from across America. And now, here is your host, Rich Valdez.
Hi there, good evening, and what's up, America? I am Rich Valdez, Valdez with an S, at Rich Valdez on all of the social media. Welcome to the Thursday night edition of the program. If you want to join us, give us a call, 833-4, I don't even know the number, 482-5337, 833-4 And there's a lot going on, right? We've got the Supreme Court was in session today. The New York Times, of all publications, the Gray Lady, is predicting that Trump will score a victory and remain on the ballot. Now, I don't know if they listened to this show, but I think I said the same thing. I think many said the same thing because it makes all the sense in the world that you got to let the people decide. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a little bit with somebody who was there on the ground at the Supreme Court today listening to the oral arguments. But everybody's suggesting that the Supreme Court is skeptical and they're positioned well to keep Trump on the ballot. So that's a thing. And, of course, Joe Biden, he dodged a bullet yesterday when the special counsel, or maybe that was earlier today, I think it was last night, though, where the special counsel says he's not going to be charging Biden. And he did a press conference today indicating same. And, I mean, I don't know. Nobody can see me. And if you're driving, keep your hands on the wheel. But, you know, show of hands here, right? Raise your hand if you thought Joe Biden was going to get charged in the documents case, right? I didn't. If I woke up tomorrow and heard that Joe Biden had got indicted for anything, I don't know. I might pass out. I don't believe we live in a world where that can happen. Well, number one, because he's president, and the Office of Legal Counsel has said that you can't indict a sitting president. So I get that. So I don't expect any charges to be brought against Biden. The same way I didn't expect any charges to be brought against Trump. Even though he keeps arguing that, you know, that presidents have an immunity because of the office, the same way Congress members have, qualified immunity. And up until a couple of years ago, a lot of cops had qualified immunity. But it doesn't surprise me in the least that hasn't happened, right? It just doesn't. It's a sad truth. And let's see what else we got here. Biden makes another gaffe in a press conference. I'm looking for my audio list to see if we have do we have that president of Egypt? Okay, I can't see it. So, I want to do this, the one I'm talking about. Let's go. All right. Well, what we're going to do is none of those, since I can't see it. We're going to talk about what's going on at the border, because the border seems to be an increasingly dangerous place. Women are being raped as they come across. Children are getting ill. I remember a couple of years ago they found like a dad and a male and a small child. Nobody knows if they were related or not, but I would presume they were. It's from the positioning of the bodies. Again, this is 2018, maybe 2019. It looked like the adult was trying to protect the child, surround himself around him. And then after that, another child died in custody after he'd come across the border and was ill and then died from that illness. Because people get sick when they're coming across the border. And I feel like there's always a degree of anger that comes with people that are going across the border. And don't come to our country, get out of here, blah, blah, blah. And I get it. It's very frustrating to feel like you're in a country that has zero protection. But the reason we have zero protection is because of a white man, right, named Joe Biden, right? It's not because of the brown people coming across the border as much as it is the white man inviting them. And I'm saying this for the sake of being provocative. I really don't care about anybody's race. But my point is, we have to focus on all the lives that are being lost, whether they're citizens or not, I feel like we, the United States, our government, our president, namely, is the one that's really perpetuating this crime against humanity, this just atrocity on people. And what do? I mean, it's day in and day out. And I think many, I won't say many of us, but I think many, maybe in the media and others that see this on a regular basis are desensitized to it. And then others are only looking at it one way, like, this is my country, I'm losing my country, I can't stand the Democrats. I get that. But I think there's an angle of compassion that I feel like is escaping me. Can't speak for anybody else, but I feel like it escapes me when I look at these things, and instead of looking for a solution or seeing how we're being hurt, or the totality of how we're being hurt, I look at just at how I'm being hurt. And I think I'm not as hurt by someone providing cheap labor as that person losing, a child, or this woman being raped coming across because of Joe Biden's lack of integrity, Joe Biden's lack of just being a good person and allowing this to happen and not putting a stop to it, not, putting back in the Migrant Protection Protocol, the MPP, what they call the Remain in Mexico policy, not suspending catch and release. Every one of those executive orders that he signed coming into office, reversing all of Trump's policies, not only at the border, but with respect to energy production in the United States, where we were energy dominant and now we're not. And now we're energy dependent on the Middle East. And he was in Saudi Arabia, hat in hand. And all of that transpired over the last few years. So it makes sense to me that he doesn't do well in polls lately, and that Democrats are trying to, suggest alternatives. But I think there's the angle of compassion, at least for me. What would George W. Bush call it? Compassionate conservatism. I don't know if that's really what I would call it. I think it's just common sense humanity. I think that's something that has been escaping the conversation, and I don't want to lose sight of it on this program. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Anyway, we're going to talk about the Supreme Court, and we'll talk about Joe Biden and all of the funny things he said in the press conference about an hour and a half, 2 hours ago. And what else? We got a few things lined up for you tonight, so just stick around. If you want to join the conversation, 833-482-5337, 833-4-VALDEZ.
This is America at Night with Rich Valdez.
Well, thank you, Rich, and thank you for everything. I know you very well, and I listen, but I have a lot of people that listen, and they love your show, and I appreciate it very much.
America at Night with Rich Valdez.
All right, familia, welcome back, amigos. And today, like I said, President Trump's attorney was making his oral arguments in front of the Supreme Court, and his name, Jonathan Mitchell, discussing the Colorado Supreme Court decision disqualifying Trump on the ballot, saying that it's just simply wrong. Listen to this.
Colorado Supreme Court held that President Donald J. Trump is constitutionally disqualified from serving as president under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. The Colorado Supreme Court's decision is wrong and should be reversed for numerous independent reasons. The first reason is that President Trump is not covered by Section 3 because the president is not an officer of the United States, as that term is used throughout the Constitution. Officer of the United States refers only to appointed officials, and it does not encompass elected individuals, such as the president or members of Congress. This is clear from the Commissions Clause, the Impeachment Clause, and the Appointments Clause, each of which uses officers of the United States to refer only to appointed and not elected officials. The second reason is that Section 3 cannot be used to exclude a presidential candidate from the ballot, even if that candidate is disqualified from serving as president under Section 3, because Congress can lift that disability after the candidate is elected, but before he takes office. A state cannot exclude any candidate for federal office from the ballot on account of Section 3, and any state that does so is violating the holding of term limits by altering the Constitution's qualifications for federal office. The Colorado Supreme Court's decision is no different from a state residency law that requires members of Congress to inhabit the state prior to Election Day, when the Constitution requires only that members of Congress inhabit the state that they represent when elected. In both situations, a state is accelerating the deadline to meet a constitutionally imposed qualification and is thereby violating the holding of term limits. And in this situation, a ruling from this court that affirms the decision below would not only violate term limits, but take away the votes of potentially tens of millions of Americans.
Well, there you have a very measured argument to the Supreme Court, in my opinion, and I want to get the opinion of somebody who's an appellate attorney before the Supreme Court, a former White House lawyer and senior legal analyst at Breitbart News, Ken Klukowski. Welcome, sir.
Rich, thanks so much for having me.
I appreciate it. So you were observing this case today, and I want to get your reaction to what Mr. Mitchell just mentioned, and overall your reaction to what you saw in court today.
Well, I'll tell you, it was a fascinating oral argument to be at. I've been to the court probably about 200 times. I also filed one of the briefs in the court. Had the honor of representing former U.S. Attorneys General Ed Meese, Michael Mukasey, and Bill Barr, along with scholars and the great people at Citizens United. And it was fascinating seeing the different angles that were unpacked in this case. And as Jonathan mentioned, that there are several separate reasons for any one of which President Trump is not disqualified under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, and they unpacked each of those issues. What I found fascinating is, in a radio interview I did right before oral argument when I was there at the court and we were waiting to go in, is I said that given how extreme and how divorced from history and the text I thought the Colorado court's decision was, a 4-3 decision where the 3 dissenting justices were highlighting how extreme the majority opinion was, I said, I would hazard the guess, reluctant to, but I would hazard the guess that I thought this decision might even come out unanimous 9-0 or 8-1. Now, after coming out of argument, I have to say I would actually double down on those numbers. I think this will not be a 5-4 decision or even 6-3. I think it's going to be unanimous or close to unanimous.
Wow. And that's I guess, encouraging to hear that the Constitution's not dead and being shredded. I think the case that he made, from what I could understand of it as a layman, made a lot of sense, right? The president's not a constitutional officer. He's elected. He's not appointed. And that was the spirit of it as in, what he cited. But what are some of the other aspects that you just mentioned that on their own also disqualify this case?
Yeah, you're right that the phrase officer of the United States, when it's used elsewhere in the Constitution, because it is used in several other places, refers to people appointed by the president, not to the president himself, and it doesn't refer to elected officials either. And that makes sense with Section 3, because Section 3 says senators, representatives, presidential electors, it goes through a list. And that says officers of the United States. So it's Colorado's argument is that the president is just folded into this catch-all provision at the end when things like members of the House and Senate and electors and stuff are being individually named, that for some reason the president is not individually named. Who really was interested in that point, because it's a point we talked a lot about in the brief that I co-authored, was Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, appointed by President Biden, made the point, and I have a write-up coming out from Breitbart News talking about each of the justices, where she said, why is the word president not mentioned when it's mentioning all of these other offices? Because elsewhere in the Constitution, where there is such a list, the president is always named, and he's always named first. It's the offices are typically listed in descending order, starting with the president. And this did not come up in today's argument, but it is in our brief. In the early draft of the amendment, when Congress was debating it in 1866, it did mention president. It mentioned president and vice president, and during the debates, they stripped out those words, inserted the words presidential electors instead. And so it was a deliberate change. And again, that wasn't really unpacked or an oral argument.
Right.
They were hitting a lot of issues, but that history is before the court. So all of that is one totally separate issue. And again, I know we have limited time here, but a totally separate issue is that we also have that also Section 3 is not self-executing, meaning it takes legislation passed by Congress. It creates power for the government to do it, but then it's up to the lawmakers to determine what the specifics are, and that there is a section in the 14th Amendment, Section 5, that says that Congress may, by appropriate legislation, implement the provisions of this amendment. And we see that with several other parts of the 14th Amendment. For those who say it is self-executing, it's like, well, wait a second, what would that look like? Do you just have one partisan official, like in this case, the Democrat Secretary of State of Colorado, who can just unilaterally declare, I issue the finding that Donald Trump is an insurrectionist. Right. Therefore, I have sole power to say he can't be on the ballot.
Yeah, it's crazy to me that one person would have such power and that the people don't.
Yeah, that's right. And so, so that issue was there. Now, another point that came up related to that was Congress has actually implemented one part of this in a statute. They have defined insurrection as a federal crime. It's found at 18 U.S.C. Section 2383. And it says right there in 2383, that if you engage in insurrection, you're disqualified from federal office. It says it right there. The problem for the left is this. President Trump has never been convicted of insurrection. He hasn't even been charged with insurrection. You have these prosecutors out there, and despite all the things that they have charged him with, they have not charged him with insurrection. So Congress has actually put legislation on the books that would carry into effect Section 3, but the powers that be have not tried to bring charges against the president under that, and they used to have other provisions in place, other enforcement mechanisms. They passed it in a law called the Enforcement Act of 1870, but the rest of that law has long since been repealed, many decades ago. And so it's saying, look, the ball is in Congress's court, and there's even one law still on the books that can be used for this. But where Congress chooses to not have currently, a broad-based system for evaluating claims like this, individual state judges and state officials don't have like this automatic power in their back pocket that they can just whip out and disqualify competing, politicians from the other party.
Right. Folks, stick with us. We're going to continue with our guest, Ken Klukowski, SCOTUS appellate attorney, former White House lawyer, and Breitbart News senior legal analyst. He's knocking it out of the park and helping us understand what happened at the Supreme Court earlier today. Don't go anywhere, folks. Coming right back with Ken Klukowski and me, Rich Valdez.
America at Night with Rich Valdez.
Do you take responsibility for at least being careless with classified material?
I take responsibility for not having seen exactly what my staff was doing. It goes in and points out things that appeared in my garage, things that came out of my home, things that were moved not by me but my staff.
Hold on. We're not going to talk about Joe Biden just yet. That was a misfire. The audio that I asked for was Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, and it was what we mentioned in the last segment. Listen to this.
What is very clear from the history is that the framers were concerned about charismatic rebels who might rise through the ranks up to and including the presidency of the United States.
But then why didn't they put the word president in the very enumerated list in Section 3? The thing that really is troubling to me is I totally understand your argument, but they were listing people that were barred, and president is not there. And so I guess that just makes me worry that maybe they weren't focusing on the president. And, for example, the fact that electors of vice president and president are there suggests that really what they thought was, if we're worried about the charismatic person, we're going to bar insurrectionist electors, and therefore that person is never going to rise.
This came up in the debates in Congress over Section 3, where Reverdy Johnson said, why haven't you included president and vice president in the language? And Senator Morrill responds, we have. Look at the language, any office under the United States.
Yes, but doesn't that at least suggest ambiguity? And this sort of ties into Justice Kavanaugh's point. In other words, we had a person right there at the time saying what I'm saying. The language here doesn't seem to include president. Why is that? And so if there's an ambiguity, why would we construe it to, as Justice Kavanaugh pointed out, against democracy?
And again, that is Associate Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. Our guest is back with us, and he's a former White House lawyer, Supreme Court appellate attorney, and the senior legal analyst at Breitbart News, Ken Klukowski. Ken, you'd mentioned this exchange earlier, and I just wanted to play it so the audience could have all of the context. And I thought it was funny.
Thank you.
It really was.
Well, because you're teeing up the very next sentence. I think what you got there was perfect, and I was checking some audio myself in the background. The very next sentence. This was the only part where, with decorum, you sit there in complete silence, especially in the bar section. You're right there, and you're just feet away from the justices. You're an officer of the court.
You're not allowed to laugh.
It's at most people. If a justice tells a joke, everyone can laugh tastefully. But right. But aside from that, you don't express anything. You sit, you kind of act like a judge. You just sit there quietly listening, and. The very next sentence from
They'd kick me out of there.
I can understand. It's the very next sentence or two after that exchange is where the Colorado voters lawyer Murray made the comment where he said that this person Reverdy Johnson then agreed with Senator Moore that it is covered. That is not what he said at all. This is the one spot where I wished I could have gotten up and say that's not true. Is as we unpacked in our brief. What he then said, the senator who brought up this point, is he said, oh, well, perhaps I was mistaken because you're mentioning these individual officers here. You hadn't mentioned president, but perhaps I'm wrong. And as you read the exchange, this is a senator. He's speaking in genteel fashion on the record during floor debates with another senator that he's not fighting with, that it's not an adversarial exchange. So as you read the language, it's all a bunch of pleasantries and courtesies, and, you don't point your finger and say, no, you're an idiot or whatever. The senators always talk about my good friend, even if they can't stand him. It's like my good friend from Tennessee or
proper
my
decorum.
Good friend from absolutely right. And so as you read that exchange, you see it appears clear to me. Johnson was flagging what he saw as a problem. And he's like, maybe I'm wrong, but I just want to point this out. So when the Colorado lawyer Murray was saying, oh, and then Johnson agreed with Moore, absolutely not. Nothing of the sort. Instead, it actually spoke to what Justice Jackson had been saying. And that was, hang on a second, it specifies senator. It specifies representative. And it goes through this whole list of people, and she's just saying, I can't say it better than she did, where she's like, why don't they say president? Now, when you couple that with the history, that in the earlier address they did say president and they said vice president, let me tell you what was going on there. And that was they were not, as you read those debates, Congress was not concerned about some Confederate general having such nationwide popularity that they get elected president. What they were concerned about is this, and that was like, if you've ever seen the movie, have you ever seen the movie Lincoln, Rich?
Yeah, sure.
All right, and I hope all of your listeners,
Daniel Day-Lewis, right?
Watch it. Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic, a lot of great history in there. And it's the story of the passage of the 13th Amendment that ended slavery after towards the end of the Civil War. And as that movie shows, it passed by the skin of their teeth. They just barely, a united Republican Party, just had to offer all sorts of offices and jobs and just to persuade barely enough Democrat members in the U.S. House to join the Republicans to give the necessary two-thirds to propose a constitutional amendment to go to the states for ratification. This is coming right after that. Okay, that was 1865. The debates we're talking about next year, 1866. They just barely got this measure through, and they knew they needed additional constitutional provisions to be able to bring the country back together. The concern was, wait a second, if we readmit all of these Southern Confederate states, what if they start electing a bunch of Confederate generals as members of the House? Or Confederate generals or Confederate senators as part of now the U.S. Senate? We won't have the votes to pass anything. We barely passed what we got. If we bring in all these people that were at war with us, we're going to be gridlocked. And so the concern was we need to be able – there needs to be a mechanism for disqualifying people from the South who might have enough popularity to get elected to a local position. And they even had a check on the presidency by taking out the word president, but saying that they could disqualify presidential electors, so they could disqualify disloyal Southern presidential electors in those states as well. And by determining if someone was disqualified from being an elector in the Electoral College, you could make sure that you didn't have like this rush of support to get some major Confederate leader elected to nationwide office. So that's what was going on here, and that history perfectly matches with what we now see in the text that they were debating today at the Supreme Court.
Yeah, that is an outstanding explanation, and it really is my original interest in the Constitution was around the history of it, because I couldn't understand why it existed the way it did. And if you don't, in my opinion, if you don't look at the founders and really what informed the founders' view, the older documents, the Magna Carta, the ideas of some of those that came out of the Enlightenment.
Absolutely.
Until I understood that, then I understood better how the framers got to the to where they landed on a lot of things, and that explanation
exactly right.
really colors it. Yeah, I appreciate it. I really do. Now, when we come back, I want to get a quick take from you on Joe Biden and not getting charged. Now, again, as a political person, observing this, I think I never expected him to get charged. One, because the Office of Legal Counsel says you can't indict a sitting president, and two, because I feel that he's above the law, not because he deserves to be, because he's a Democrat, and I just didn't see a world where the special counsel was going to go, yep, we think Biden did something bad. We're coming after him. I just didn't see it happening. But we're going to hear a clip of audio that we got a preview of before, and I want to get your reaction to that as well. Folks, we're on with Ken Klukowski, Supreme Court appellate attorney, former White House and Department of Justice lawyer, and the senior legal analyst at Breitbart News. And as he mentioned earlier, wrote part of the brief and was there in the courtroom today as the oral arguments were heard at the United States Supreme Court. So keep it locked right here with me, Rich Valdez, and our guest, Ken Klukowski.
This is America at Night with Rich Valdez. America at Night with Rich Valdez.
Do you take responsibility for at least being careless with classified material?
I take responsibility for not having seen exactly what my staff was doing. It goes in and points out things that appeared in my garage, things that came out of my home, things that were moved not by me but my staff.
Yeah. You got to love it. We went from a president that said the buck stops with me to a president that says, my staff. Anyway, I'm not going to do my Biden impression any longer. We've got Ken Klukowski with us, Supreme Court appellate attorney, former White House lawyer, Breitbart senior legal analyst. And Ken, what's your take on this documents case? They're obviously charging Trump now that he's not in office. In my opinion, a huge case about not a lot. If you think I'm wrong, correct the record.
Well, before we go there, if I may, just one quick thing to tie up regarding the Supreme Court this morning that I thought was fascinating because it shows, well, I'll just get right into it, is two-part thing. First of all, with Justice Neil Gorsuch. Right. It's because, of course, Colorado is saying, no, this is self-executing. Just, if Trump did it, then he's invalid and anyone can declare him to be disqualified. And Justice Gorsuch is like, okay, so when does he become invalid? And they said, well, he would have been disqualified from office on January 6, 2021. And he's like, okay, he still had 2 weeks in office. He said, did he stop being commander-in-chief right then? He said, so should military commanders have immediately started just deciding to disobey his orders? Because he's no longer really the president at that point. Now, the Colorado lawyer, clearly not schooled up, he was in way over his head. He was totally out of his depth.
Just interrupt. I think bringing the case,
go ahead.
That was one of my questions for you earlier, and I probably should have waited, but since you brought it up, I feel like, do these guys walk away with egg on their face? Do the rest of these high-level lawyers like yourself look at them and go, man, what a chump. I can't believe this guy did that.
Well, I don't want to put myself at that level. I'll say that I do work alongside lawyers who are most definitely at that level, where you see them make just critical errors in front of the court, and you realize, okay, if you're going to be a partisan, activist, in your area or whatever, maybe that kind of stuff will fly there. But when you're in front of the U.S. Supreme Court, you have to set aside the bumper stickers and the jingo, and you have to actually, do the job of carrying the argument. And if your argument falls apart, it's no amount of smooth talking is gonna bridge the gap. And so Gorsuch, and so as this guy came back and said, well, I don't. Well, military leaders can't, decide the legality of the presidency. And you're just looking at these people stunned because you're like, you don't know what you're talking about, do you? Right. A military officer under UCMJ, a military officer is legally required to disobey an unlawful order. So if Donald Trump had become a private citizen, he can't issue any lawful orders. So any military general getting an order from him is actually under a legal obligation to treat him as no different than you would just a private citizen on the street. He might be a great guy, but he's not your commander-in-chief. And so totally stepped in it there. And then separately and relatedly, when the Colorado Solicitor General was when Justice Alito was expressing, are you worried about the Pandora's box that we could open if all of a sudden, just at the last minute, some states could declare one candidate an insurrectionist, other states could declare another state to be an insurrectionist. Maybe they could do this. He was talking between this and the other Colorado lawyer, Jason Murray, was saying, what if they do this 3 days before Election Day or anything? As he's laying out these hypotheticals, she came back saying, well, what if they just all start declaring each other to be insurrectionists and you're disqualifying whole candidates in whole states at the last minute? You could throw a whole presidential election into utter chaos. And she said, well, I just think we need to have enough faith in our institutions that wouldn't happen. And it's, you know what, when you're trying to get the Supreme Court to hand down a historic decision that will fundamentally change the way presidential elections work in this country, you don't want to say, oh, I don't think we need to worry about it. You better have a tight answer as to why what you're asking for does not open the floodgates to the nightmare scenario that they brought up, especially since not only did Sam Alito say it, but Chief Justice John Roberts said it. So it's like, okay, if the justices, these are the people who decide your case. If they tell you they're concerned about something, guess what? You just became concerned about it. And even if it's not where you were going, you're like, that's a great point, Mr. Justice, and then you just run with whatever they're saying, because ultimately they're the ones who decide what the outcome will be. And that is just not what we saw today.
Yeah, and that was really the gist of my question. I was thinking, when somebody like Jason Murray brings his case and makes these arguments, I can't help but think that, guys like yourself, just people that have argued before the Supreme Court and have done that type of work, can't help but look at them and say, poor kid, poor guy, he's in way over his head and, you're drowning and you shouldn't be here. And it seems like a partisan attack, right? The whole case, to me, seems like it lacks a lot of merit, but they brought it anyway. And I'm just suspicious of that. We are scheduled to wrap with you here, but I wanted to get your thoughts on Biden. I don't know if you could stick around. Ken, can you?
We could do something real tight. I'm afraid I can't do the whole segment, but but I'm glad to be here regardless.
All right, stick with us, folks. We're coming right back quickly with Ken Klukowski.
This is America at Night with Rich Valdez.
All right, America, the deep state is at it again. Every now and again, they get into the machines, but we're still on with Ken Klukowski. And Ken, my thought here is, I didn't expect Biden to have charges brought against him, but I'm wondering why they bring him against Trump and they didn't bring him against Biden. What's the legalese there?
Well, I'll tell you, there are two things concerning about that. One is legal and one is political. The thing that, or I should say policy rather than political, the policy thing that's alarming is if a man is so addled, so feeble-minded that you think he'd be too just sympathetic in a courtroom because he seems like he's not all there. Is that a guy you want controlling the nuclear launch codes of a nation and leading the world's superpower? So I think it was a stunning indictment of President Biden's lack of fitness for office. If they're saying that this guy was so clueless in our interviews, we just felt sorry for him, and we thought even a jury would feel sorry for him. They'd be like, that's a silver alert. Let's please get this guy to an old folks home. I'm like, first of all, that is not a resounding, that doesn't inspire confidence as to who you want to lead your country. But legally, it's alarming to say, wait a second, do we want prosecutors making decisions based on how sympathetic they think a defendant looks because of some infirmity that they have? We should have equal justice under the law.
Amen to that, Ken Klukowski, and thanks for sticking around. Let everybody know how they can find you quickly. You bet. We lost Ken, but you find him on Breitbart News, Ken Klukowski. Folks, we're coming right back. We're going to continue looking at the news of the day, in particular, what's going on in the world regarding the law. Don't go anywhere.
Live from the city that never sleeps. 17 miles from Madison Square Garden, New York City. It's America at Night with Rich Valdez. America's favorite late-night talk program featuring interesting guests from around the world and calls from across America. And now, here is your host, Rich Valdez.
Hi there, good evening, and what's up, America? I am Rich Valdez, Valdez with an S, at Rich Valdez on all of the social media. And we continue our discussion tonight, right? We've been talking about what happened at Supreme Court today. And the Supreme Court is well positioned, right? Most media outlets are saying that they're going to side with the Constitution and that Trump is on the right side of that. So it's going to be a victory for the Trump team. At least that's what it appears to be. I don't see, again, we just had Ken Klukowski on, who's just shared with us that he's been before the court 200 times or at the court 200 times, and that he felt that this was going to be 9-0 unanimous or 8-1 at worst. So encouraging. Seems like it's going to be a good day for El Trumpito. Now, some of my friends, good people, good patriots, people that I love, but I think have a misguided view of how the Constitution and the political system works, believe that the Supreme Court is going to make a decision on election fraud, and that somehow the Supreme Court, which doesn't imprison anyone, is going to imprison people. And when I hear these things on the internet and on social media, I can't help but think, come on, don't fall for that stuff. This is literally what foreign governments specialize in, destabilizing our people, destabilizing our political systems so that they can put these ideas into people's heads. And, you know, it does not surprise me in the least when you have a group of people that are like, I love this country, and they're pounding their chest, and they're absolutely, you know, in love with America. And I love that. Patriotism is fantastic. And then they say things like, you know, the Supreme Court's going to do something they've never done. And you just sit back, folks, grab your popcorn. Oh, this is going to be good. And they're so confident that this is going to happen. But it's not. It's not happening. You know, there was some brothers who brought these cases, who tried to bring a case to the Supreme Court, multiple cases. Two brothers named Brunson a while back. And they were on the basis that they were trying to get to the Supreme Court. And they got to the point where the Supreme Court had to hear them because they filed it a certain way with the state court, and it got bounced to the Supreme Court, where the Supreme Court immediately said, no, we're not hearing that. And that was that. But they were alleging a similar case, right, that the election in 2020 was a complete fraud. Now, again, I'm not saying that that's not true. But what I'm saying is the Supreme Court's not going to make that decision because it's just not, right? There's no case on the docket that even suggests that there's going to be a decision like that. Moreover, there's not a case where the Supreme Court's going to recommend that anybody go to jail, or that in addition to anybody going to jail, that they're going to send them to a military tribunal. Right? And these are some of the crazy things that I hear, and they're crazy because they're not congruent with the facts. They're not congruent with reality. They're not congruent with history. And now you could say, but Rich, is what we're seeing congruent with history? Is an open border congruent with history? No, it's not. And it is an anomaly. It's something we haven't seen before. Some people would say, so then what about massive mail-in ballots in a presidential election? Is that congruent with history? Not necessarily. But again, in 1860, there were mail-in ballots during the Civil War, and because it was a civil war, and there was massive fraud, and I think I've talked about that on this show. And there, you know, the Tilden Hayes election was a big deal, right? That's why we have the Electoral Count Act. So we have some precedent for that, but even then, you know, it went a different way, and the Supreme Court did make a decision on that in some ways. So, but again, nobody was jailed for this, but it's happened, right? History can repeat itself. So I'm not saying that didn't happen. What I am saying is that this idea that the most egregious characters in this, I'm going to call it a movie, this movie that we're watching, they're not going to go to jail like bad guys do in Hollywood movies. In real life, the bad guys make money and they go on to make more money. And you know, it's usually a couple of good guys that'll take the fall somewhere so that they could say they're the bad guys. And lamentably, that's what I see happening here. So for all the direct messages and inbox messages and, emails and text messages that I get of people telling me, can't just wait and see the true president is going to show his face. It's going to be Trump. He's working with John F. Kennedy Jr., who's not really dead. I mean, the craziest things that I hear. I just want to encourage everybody to let go of that stuff and to treat it like fantasy football. If you want to play that game, just say, okay, it's fake. And, it's our version of a live action role play. It's what we'd like to see happen. But it's not reality, because reality is what ends up happening in the courtroom. Reality is what ends up happening when the law is actually applied. And that's what we're seeing. And we saw that earlier today in the Supreme Court. And we're also seeing it play out with Trump's appeal now for presidential immunity. The appellate court says, no, you are not immune, and that's that. So now that's a 3-judge panel in the D.C. Circuit Court. They've decided this issue that Trump brought to the court, and now that's going to likely, in my opinion, is going to have to go to the Supreme Court for them to decide. Does a president have the type of immunity that he's presenting in this case? And I think he's making a very good case. So to get to the bottom of that, I want to talk with John Malcolm. He's vice president of the Institute for Constitutional Government and the director of the Meese Center and the Simon Center. And he's a senior legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation. John Malcolm, welcome.
Hi, good to be with you.
Likewise, sir. So when we talk about this issue of presidential immunity, I'm wondering, for the sake of the listeners, if you could just lay out a little bit about what the Trump team argued in that case, and then sort of, maybe in the next segment, what the appellate court kind of responded with.
Sure. The Trump team argued that the president has a constitutional obligation to take care that the laws be faithfully executed, and that includes the election laws, and that is what he was doing, and that for a court to second guess that violates separation of powers, and that he could not be criminally tried with one exception, and that exception is that he was impeached and convicted. And the Court of Appeals rejected that argument on various grounds. They said, no, a criminal law is a statute that limits the discretion about what a president can do, that he can't, on the one hand, take care that the laws be faithfully executed while blatantly violating those laws. And they also said that impeachment really just decides whether someone gets to hold office or not. It's a political punishment of some kind. It's not a criminal punishment, that is a separate process, and that has to go through indictment and a court proceeding.
And I want to get to the crux of it and some of your analysis on that when we come back. Folks, we're on with John Malcolm, Vice President of the Institute for Constitutional Government at the Heritage Foundation. He's director of the Meese Center and the Simon Center, and the Gilbertson Lindbergh Senior Legal Fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Don't go anywhere.
This is America at Night with Rich Valdez. Call now, 833-4-VALDEZ. That's 833-482-5337. 833-4-VALDEZ. That's Valdez with an S. This is America at Night with Rich Valdez.
All right, amigos, welcome back, familia. We're talking about Trump's presidential immunity claim getting denied by the Federal Appeals Court. And, of course, your calls are welcome, 833-482-5337, 833-4-VALDEZ. Our guest is John Malcolm. He's the VP of the Meese Center at the Heritage Foundation. And, John Malcolm, you gave us a nutshell of what was going on before. Help us pick this apart. They rejected the Trump claim on several areas. Help us understand that a little bit.
Sure. So they said, look, we as a court of appeals have to assume that all of the allegations in the indictment are true. They may turn out at the end of the day not to be true. That's what a trial will determine. So they said we have to accept that a grand jury indicted former President Trump on these 4 charges and that he intentionally and knowingly engaged in criminal violations. He knew that the claims he was making were false. He knew that he was, trying through illegitimate means to stay in power. And the president, former president, basically said, look, you don't get to question anything I did while I was in office. And the only way you can do that in a criminal trial is by first impeaching me and convicting me, because the impeachment clause is explicit in the Constitution that once somebody has been impeached and removed, they can be prosecuted. And what the Court of Appeals said was that goes too far. No man is above the law. That includes the President of the United States. There had been, a lot of other officials, judges and congressmen who have left office. They have been criminally charged, even though the crimes they committed could arguably connected to actions they took as judges and legislators. So a judge issues a ruling, but the reason the judge issues the ruling is he's being paid a bribe, that sort of thing, and that they are subject to a criminal enforcement. And the same thing would apply to the president. Another argument the president could have made is that there is case law that says that former presidents are immune from civil lawsuits so long as a president was acting, quote unquote, within the outer perimeter of his actions. And the reason the Supreme Court did that was to say, look, every action that a president takes is going to irritate somebody. And if they are going to be subjected to a civil lawsuit, that could open the floodgates to hundreds, if not thousands, of vexatious litigation against a former president. And this court ended up saying criminal laws are a little bit different. There's more important considerations in enforcing those. These are left up to the Department of Justice. This only happened once in our history. There's no real evidence that this is going to open a floodgates. So we're going to come out with a different ruling. Rather significantly, they actually put in a footnote that said there's been an argument made that state prosecutors would also engage in all of these prosecutions, but we don't have to decide that case today. We're only talking about a federal prosecution brought by one federal prosecutor.
So the next step here is for this to go to a larger panel of the appellate court or directly to the Supreme Court. What's that process look like?
That's going to be largely determined by former President Trump. So you would normally think that, and this may well be what he ends up doing, he wants to push this trial out as late as possible, not only in the hopes of getting a victory in a higher court, but even if he loses before the higher courts, he wants to push this case off until after the election. So you would think that he would apply for what's referred to as a rehearing en banc by the entire D.C. Circuit. And he may well still do that. The panel tried to force his hand a little bit by saying, President Trump, you can appeal to the Supreme Court if you want to by Monday. If you appeal to the Supreme Court, we will withhold the mandate issuing the formal opinion until the Supreme Court decides what to do with that petition. But if you petition for rehearing en banc before the full court, we're not going to withhold the mandate. We will issue the mandate, and that will give Judge Chutkan the opportunity to say, okay, we're now going back on a trial calendar, and we're going to consider all these pretrial motions that have been filed.
And obviously Chutkan seems to want to do that yesterday, way before the election.
Yes, that's exactly right. Now, she was forced to put things completely on hold before the D.C. Circuit issued its opinion. But now that it's issued its opinion, once the mandate is issued, unless and until the D.C. Circuit or the Supreme Court stops it, she can, reopen her courtroom doors, start issuing rulings and have hearings on pretrial proceedings, and set a new date on the trial calendar.
Now, help us understand the angle, and I've heard this argument made by many that, and several, but among them Attorney General Ed Meese, Mark Levin, and others have been saying that the appointment of Jack Smith as special counsel violates the Constitution's appointments clause, and therefore this whole thing doesn't work. Walk us through it.
Very interesting argument. So General Meese and others have argued that Jack Smith was not properly appointed under the appointments clause. For a long, long time, Jack Smith was was in the Department of Justice. He probably even had a Senate-confirmed position at some point, but he left the Department of Justice and he was detailed over to The Hague, where he was engaging in international prosecutions for war crimes, things like that. The appointments clause basically says that if you are a superior officer, you have to be nominated by the president, confirmed by the Senate, and then appointed to that position by the president. And there is a provision that says, if you're in the attorney general or the deputy attorney general or you're a United States attorney, all of these people have been appointed to, nominated, confirmed, and appointed. Jack Smith did not go through that process. So the argument is he is a superior officer, but he did not get properly appointed. The D.C. Circuit said in a footnote, yes, this argument was raised, but it wasn't really addressed below. It's a collateral issue. We're not going to address it. There is precedent in the D.C. Circuit that actually rejects that argument. There was a similar challenge to Bob Mueller, who was a special counsel who was appointed, of course, to investigate former President Trump, and somebody who was subpoenaed to appear before a grand jury in that investigation raised that issue. The D.C. Circuit rejected it. So that's the law in the D.C. Circuit. The D.C. Circuit could, again, sitting as a full court, reverse that, or the Supreme Court could reverse that. When Jack Smith originally tried going up to the Supreme Court, that issue was raised. But then when the Supreme Court decided not to hear the case on an expedited basis, there was no reason to issue a ruling on that issue. But if it goes back up to the Supreme Court may very well ask the Department of Justice or ask the special counsel to answer that very important question.
Wow. Great analysis, John Malcolm from the Heritage Foundation. Now, John, let everybody know how they can keep up to speed with the work that you're doing. And clearly you've got your finger on the pulse of this stuff, and you guys are putting out a lot of scholarly information. How do people access that?
Sure. Well, they can always go to the Heritage Foundation website and type in my name, John Malcolm, Malcolm. They can also follow me on Twitter. I post a lot of stuff that I write at Malcolm_John. And, in general, people can also, if they have real questions or concerns, they can just send an email to the Heritage Foundation. It'll probably find its way to my inbox.
Outstanding. John Malcolm, you are a gentleman, a patriot, and a scholar, and I thank you for staying up late with us.
Thanks for having me on.
You bet. Folks, we're coming right back. We continue our conversation, and we're going to talk a little bit about why are airplanes falling apart in the skies? Don't go anywhere. I'm Rich Valdez.
This is America. This is Night. This is Rich Valdez.
All right, America, welcome back, amigos. And you remember a while back, about a week ago, there was a lot of talk about the Boeing 737 where the door fell right off. It was ripped out while they were 16,000 feet above the ground. And it turns out 4 bolts were missing from the door plug when it blew off. And that's according to the NTSB. These 4 important bolts were missing from a Boeing 737 MAX 9 that lost a passenger door plug, during the flight. And that's, again, the National Transportation Safety Board. So I'd seen a number of cases, news reports, on this particular story. And I thought, what's going on? And it turns out more and more people started looking into this. And what they found was there's a major fuselage problem with these folks, that there's just a whole problem here. So you got Spirit that's now ramping up their robotics to reduce these problems. They're saying it's going to slow production down. It's going to slow down delivery. I don't know how often people are buying new 737s. Forgive me, I'm very ignorant. I've never bought one. And we also have the U.S. Airways Airbus A319 that people are saying, what's going to happen with that one? Are people going to, is that going to increase the likelihood of people buying other products? So I want to kind of get into this with somebody who really does know all about this. He's an executive with Northwest, retired, and he's an aviation consultant and really knows a lot about this. We've had him on before, and he's terrific. Jay Ratliff, welcome back, sir.
Hey, always a pleasure to be here.
You bet. So what light can you shed as this Boeing mess continues?
I'm frustrated. I really am. Boeing has been for generations the definition of safety. They have been the airline or the aircraft manufacturer that has been more committed to safety with regards to the policies, procedures, the airplanes that they have built, delivered, and it shows because we've got Boeing airplanes taking off and landing every few minutes all the way around the world. But it was a number of years ago when we had the two Boeing MAX crashes, the Lion Air crash in October of 2018, followed up with Ethiopian Air crash, which was the other MAX aircraft that killed them, crashed on March 10th, the year later, about 4.5 months later, and 346 lives were lost. We found out later as the investigation continued, as Boeing tried to immediately deflect, any real responsibility, saying that it was pilot error, it was a new airline, probably was maintenance. I mean, they were throwing all kinds of garbage. That we soon found out that as the investigation continued, Boeing was lying to the Federal Aviation inspectors. They were lying to airlines. They were omitting things to pilots about the new Boeing MAX aircraft. It was very embarrassing. It had been going on for years. And there was kind of an apology that Boeing threw out shortly thereafter, saying that safety is the core of who we are. And they went on to say that they've intensified their commitment to continuously improving safety, their products and service, blah, blah, blah. This was dated September 30th, 2019. Now, I'm going to suggest, or at least my opinion is in reading this, they didn't do any of that, because what they have done apparently, and this is just my opinion as I look through the window, is that they are getting their butt kicked right now from Airbus, the European aircraft manufacturer, that is producing aircraft at a record pace. People are buying them all over the world, and they're doing everything they can at Boeing to keep up. You have whistleblowers that work for Boeing that come forward saying, look, the schedule is the most important thing at Boeing, not us doing our job. Quality control inspectors that used to be there have been removed, all trying to cut cost and move these airplanes through as quickly as they can. And in the process, somehow having airplanes leave the facility, delivered to airlines, that I guess should have a sticker on them that says some assembly required. Because when you have these bolts and nuts that are missing, I mean,
how does that happen?
I have no clue, and I get so frustrated because the number of checks these things go through, the number of people it passes by, and for it to not be noticed tells me what else is happening that we also don't know. And now that Boeing's standing up saying we take responsibility, we're going to do blah blah. All I'm thinking is, hey guys, 2019 you were making these same promises. You told us you were going to up your intensity on making sure everything is done properly, and you're not. And that's why I have a hard time believing any of the words that come out of anybody's mouth, because they simply haven't done what they're supposed to. And you have a lot of people that are saying, is it a point where, Jay, do you not fly on a Boeing aircraft? Well, of course I fly all the time, and if it's a Boeing airplane, that's fine. If it's a Boeing MAX, would I be okay? Sure, I would get on that as well. But that doesn't mean I don't have concerns, because these airplanes that are being delivered as brand new, state-of-the-art machinery to airlines around the world that have these operational defects is completely inexcusable. And of course, the Federal Aviation Administration, who I think should have been camped out at the door of Boeing since the 2 MAX crashes a number of years ago, are now saying, okay, now we're going to send a couple more dozen inspectors. We're going to make sure they're doing what they need to be doing. And we're also going to make sure that Boeing doesn't increase the number of these airplanes per month, which is right now at 30. They were going to ramp it up to more. But it's a real confidence crisis because we don't
Who's
believe
going to buy
what
these
Boeing's saying.
things?
Well,
and my question is, how much does one of these cost?
You're talking about a couple $100 million easy for these airplanes, and of course, a lot of times they depending on how many an airline buys, they're going to get a discount on some of these things, and some of them are considerably more. But here's the deal: if you've got an airline like Southwest, they only fly one kind of airplane, Boeing. Now they do that because it saves them money on training. It saves their money on ground equipment. It is a brilliant way to make sure you only have one type of aircraft for training purposes, and everything else from pilots to mechanics and everything else. Where are they going to go?
Parts,
they're not going to go grab a Boeing aircraft. Now, they should be getting a pretty sweet deal from Boeing on any future aircraft. But a lot of these airlines around the world that are saying we're preparing to make our next order, they thought with Boeing are saying, well, we might want to rethink it. Now, I'm sure Boeing is scrambling right now, trying to save every future order they can. They're probably offering every incentive possible. But because the confidence in Boeing has been so good long range past, there's this thought process that, well, they're going to get their act together. So we'll accept this sweet deal where we can get a nice discount or whatever promises they're giving, and we'll keep the order we have to buy 50 or 100 of the narrow-bodied or long-range wide-body aircraft. But if you buy one of these and they have to be grounded for a period of time where inspections take place because something wasn't done that should have been done, after you've waited a number of years for these airplanes to even be delivered, it's certainly not the kind of, let's exceed expectations at every point of contact that the Boeing product wants to be. And right now, I mean, they've got a black eye. The stock has dropped maybe 20-some% since all of this. Most people think it's going to bounce right back once they clear this hurdle. But it's just, to me, it's just unthinkable that we can have airplanes that are leaving a production facility with multiple hands touching the aircraft with things not just not tightened, not installed at all. And the National Transportation Safety Board, that was one of their first questions was, this door doesn't look like it was ripped off. There's no...
It fell off.
Exactly, because there wasn't anything that was trying to hold it on after other components failed. It just poof, out it went. And this thing had been in service for, 10 weeks or something like that, numerous flights before. And I thank God nobody got, seriously hurt on that, because somebody didn't have their seatbelt on that had been sitting next to that door, and thank God no one was. I mean, out they go. And we had so much stuff flying out that depressurization when it took place. I mean, it blew open the cockpit door. And remember, that's reinforced. It threw the pilot's head. Yeah, it threw the pilot's head into the console. I mean, it was intense.
Wow. So this could have been a way bigger deal than it was.
Absolutely. And that's one of the reasons we got lucky. But we never should have gotten to this point, because the Boeing of 2019 and 20, with all their promises, should have been delivering a better product than what they're doing right now.
Jay Ratliff, stand by. We're going to come right back. I want to continue this conversation because that's just a scary thought. Plus, a couple of other topics in aviation. Folks, we're on with Jay Ratliff, aviation consultant and former Northwest Airlines executive, and we're coming right back. Don't go anywhere.
This is America at Night with Rich Valdez. Call now, 833-4-VALDEZ. That's 833-482-5337. 833-4-VALDEZ. That's Valdez with an S. America at Night with Rich Valdez.
Fox News. Filtering by flights by aircraft. Listen to this. So travel websites allow you, certain travel websites allow you to filter out certain airplanes if you don't want to ride on a certain type of airplane. Well, guess what? since this incident has occurred where the door fell off, you've got the flights that are being filtered by Boeing 737 have gone up by 15 times. 15 times the amount of people are now saying, I don't want to fly on a Boeing 737. And that's according to the website kayak.com, which is a travel website. Jay Ratliff is our guest. And Jay Ratliff, does this surprise you, that high of a number?
It doesn't. Of course, anytime there's a situation where we have an accident or a near accident, you have a kind of a flurry of traffic as far as people looking to avoid certain types of airplanes, saying they'll never fly them again, and then 6 months later they forget about it and they're right back on the same plane. But keep in mind that even if let's say you are uncomfortable about flying a Boeing 737 MAX aircraft, if you happen to look at a future reservation and you see that's what you're confirmed with, you can contact the airline, and most of the time they've been pretty accommodating if you want to change your reservation to fly at a different time or a different type of equipment or type of aircraft might be offered. The one thing, though, to keep in mind is if you are especially connecting at a hub anywhere in the country, you may not be scheduled to fly a Boeing MAX 737 or whatever your aircraft you're trying to avoid. But you may get there and find that they've done what we call an aircraft swap, where the airplane that you were supposed to fly was late in coming in or developed some sort of a mechanical problem. So instead of canceling your flight, what they've done is what we call an aircraft swap. They've got an available aircraft there at the airport. They'll simply use that airplane instead. So if you're really going to take this kind of approach, you need to make sure that before you board each aircraft, when you get to the airport, just to make sure that the airplane that was scheduled is still what's operating. Because many times we do these aircraft swaps to keep things moving and flowing as we try to keep those silver revenue tubes in the air.
Oh, wow.
And,
Good to know.
So, it's okay to try to plan that in advance, but please keep in mind that things change frequently as you travel, and you just kind of need to keep an eye out on things because you don't want to sit on an airplane and think, I'm sure glad I avoided that airplane, and you look down at the emergency card, and that's the exact airplane that you happen to be flying on.
Right. And you freak out. That's really good advice because I didn't think of that, but I'm actually glad that happens because, I don't know anything about that other than, I fly, pretty frequently, but I just expect it to work, And
Yeah.
I never really know what's going on. And I'm just like, yeah, the crew comes in, they clean it real quick and they turn it around. And, most flights I've been on are on time. So I never really realized, how challenging it is to keep that fleet moving and stick to a schedule. And what you just brought up was a really interesting point. Now, I want to talk about something that's a little offbeat here, which is Finnair.
Oh, yeah.
The Finnish airline. They're talking about weighing passengers voluntarily as well as their carry-on luggage because they want to make this, I guess, better and help passengers to volunteer their weight so that eventually they can require it or charge you more. What's the angle here?
Well, the angle is that every so often, many airlines around the world will spend a week or two or a season where they will collect the weights of the passengers that are flying. And they do that because we live in a world of weight and balance. Every aircraft has a maximum takeoff allowable allowance as far as how much weight an airplane can carry, both in fuel, cargo, passengers, all of that. So what we need to do is make sure that the averages that we are using, like a winter weight, summer weight, whatever might happen to be for passengers, is still accurate. So every few years, what will happen is airlines around the world, and it just happens to be Finnair now, is going to be collecting this data where they're asking people to volunteer. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes they just put scales at the airport check-in counter that sometimes people don't even know that's there. And, of course, it's not like in Vegas where you get the jackpot sign above that's flashing the weight and everything for everybody to see. It's just collected so that the people in the home office can collect things and say, yeah, our averages are pretty much where they need to be. So it's a matter of safety, the reason that they're doing this. And we're seeing it a lot because, look, as individuals, we have passengers that are getting a little bit heavier. And a lot of the European airlines are using kind of an average weight and balance that says, they've got a mean weight of anywhere between 150 and 180 pounds or so, and they've got different winter weights, different summer weights, because you're going to be traveling with more luggage, clothes-wise, in the winter versus the summer. So it's all based in safety, and that's it. In fact, if you've ever flown a really small airline that might only have 6 or 8 seats, sometimes they'll even ask you to step on a scale so that they can get the actual weight that's going on board the aircraft, because when you have so few passengers, you don't have the benefit of the mean average where you have 185 people. So they want to make sure that it's exactly where it needs to be. And believe me, when it's a matter of safety, I do not care. I'll get on a scale so they know exactly what they're dealing with.
Jay Ratliff, stick around. I want to come right back and pull on a thread on that same topic. Folks, we're on with Jay Ratliff, aviation consultant and former Northwest Airlines executive. You can check out his website, daytradefund.com. Don't go anywhere. We're coming right back.
This is America at Night with Rich Valdez. America at Night with Rich Valdez.
All right, America, welcome back. We're talking to Jay Ratliff about what's going on in the airline industry. And my question to you, Jay Ratliff, before we wrap up is, what ends up happening with Americans becoming larger and larger in terms of obesity? And I feel like the airline seats get smaller and smaller every time I get on a domestic flight. If it's an international flight, they seem to be a little wider. But if the guy next to me, I'm 200 and about 6 or 7 pounds. If the guy next to me is heavier than me, he's spilling over into my seat. We're fighting over the armrest. Are there plans to, charge more or make bigger seats?
Well, make bigger seats. No, I wish they would. They're going to probably just continue to get smaller, making these the good old days that 20 years from now we'll look back and long for, which is a scary thought. But Southwest has got a policy that if they have a passenger of size, they are able to go to the gate and say, "Look, you've got a policy," and Southwest will actually give them a second seat if needed, and at no additional cost. Other airlines many times will say, okay, if it's going to take 2 seats for you to be comfortable, then we're going to have to charge you, double. Now, if the flight's not full, they may charge 150%, or it may be no extra charge at all. But airlines have that kind of policy, and sadly, it's a situation that, I've had to have those conversations with passengers and try to break it to them, and most of the time they understand that the seats are getting smaller, and for you to be comfortable, you're going to need more than 1 seat. And sadly, that's something that unfortunately is just going to continue.
Jay Ratliff, let everybody know where they could find you.
JayRatliff.com is the easiest way to reach me if you've got an airline problem. But I tell you, the website to keep in mind on DOT.gov. If you've got a complaint against an airline, do not complain to the airline. Go to the Department of Transportation.
Excellent. Department of Transportation. Jay Ratliff, thank you, sir. Appreciate you. We're coming right back with Open Phone America.
Live from the city that never sleeps. 17 miles from Madison Square Garden, New York City. It's America at Night with Rich Valdez. America's favorite late night talk program, featuring interesting guests from around the world and calls from across America. And now, here is your host, Rich Valdez.
Hi there, good evening, and what's up, America? I am Rich Valdez, Valdez with an S, at Rich Valdez on all of the social media. Welcome to the program. It's Thursday night, hour number 3. We call this one Open Phone America, and here's the phone number, 833-482-5337, 833-4Valdez. And we talked about a number of things tonight in the first 2 hours of the program. We talked about some really in-depth analysis on what's going on in Supreme Court with respect to the Trump case. The Trump case in particular that we talked about initially was the Colorado ballot case where they tried to push Trump off the ballot, and it seems like he's going to probably score a big win there for himself, staying on the ballot. And then we shifted gears to the other case where they're saying, Trump doesn't have any immunity as president, and got some really pretty in-depth analysis there as well, where the path is going to be a little bit longer, and there's a lot of caveats because, while it's a legal process, there's a little bit of a political process because there's an election looming and Trump is running for president. And in one route is to go with the Court of Appeals again, the larger full court, rather than a 3-judge panel, which would likely put him back in court before Election Day, or to go directly to the Supreme Court, which is probably the better option. But we don't know how quickly that gets heard either. So very interesting to see the legal predicaments unfolding, but it seems pretty favorable for Trump either way. So that's a quick update on that. And if you missed it, make sure you check it out on the website or the podcast. Now, we also talked about airlines. Now, this is pretty interesting because with respect to airlines, the final question I had for our guest, Jay Ratliff, was, what do we do with the large people? And the reason I ask is I was large people. I used to weigh 269 pounds. And guess what? When you're 269, you don't look like a really huge fat guy, but you're pretty big and fat. I was wearing size 40 pants, a size 48 or 50 suit jacket. My neck was a 17 and a half, 18 if I wanted to look really, loose. And it was, I didn't fit on a bus seat comfortably. I didn't fit on an airline seat comfortably. And I just think to myself, imagine people 100 pounds heavier than me, and there's a lot of 300-pound people out there. What do you do? So I was talking about that with him, and I'm wondering if you've been on, do you have a story, right? If you do, I'd love to hear from you, because I want to know, A, what's going on with, your stories with respect to being on an airline with somebody who's a lot larger than you are, and should airlines be charging double? I think that they probably should, because I don't think we should incentivize people to be larger than they ought to be, because that's not good for your health, obviously. And B, something I opened up the show with, was talking about my conspiracy theory friends. And again, I know they get offended when you call them a conspiracy theorist, because they're like, it's not a conspiracy. These things come to true, and they become truth. And listen, I'm not saying they don't, and I'm not writing them off as kooks and quacks. I do, in the sense that these particular theories that the Supreme Court is going to jail people and send them to Guantanamo Bay to be held on a military tribunal and sentenced to death, that part, it's very far-fetched, and I'm not signing up for that. So I always have to push back on those. But if you have an interesting story on that and the tinfoil hat era, I will get my tinfoil hat and wear it with you, and we can talk about that. And, of course, we're going to get to your calls momentarily. But a couple of stories I want to talk about before the hour is over. And sometimes I get so caught up talking with you guys, the next thing you know, I'm like saying goodnight, and we didn't get through everything. But check this out. A Utah school board member is now facing calls to resign after a social media post suggests that a regular teen girl was called a transgender. And listen, you know where I'm at with this culture war, but I don't think it's cool to tell a teenage girl that may not look the way you want her to look and say, hey, you're a transgender. I think tomboys do exist, and you have to be sensitive to that, right? You can't just go, hey, you're a whatever. That's not cool. If they tell you that they identify as whatever, then that's on them. And then, you could make whatever commentary you want. But I don't think we should go. It's like telling a woman that has a bulge in her stomach and just, without knowing, saying, oh, congratulations. How long are you? How far along are you? And when's your due date? And then for them to say, I'm not pregnant, Just imagine what type of foot and mouth you would have in a situation like that. Those are things we just don't do. And other story here, and this one's a little more serious, but one I want to talk about. A woman in Utah sued the police for being arrested for drunk driving, even though she was actually suffering from a subdural hematoma, a brain bleed. How about that? Not good. Not good at all. And I've seen video of stuff like that, so I'll get into that when we talk about that a little bit later on. And of course, we'll talk a little bit about Joe El Baboso Biden, because he gave a press conference about 4 hours ago now, and he was saying that he has no fault in having classified documents next to his classic Corvette inside his garage. He took no blame. He blamed his staff. We'll talk about that a little bit later as well. So keep it locked. Keep it right here with me. And I want to go to, let's see, we got Kelvin. Kelvin is calling from Logan, Utah on KVNU. Kelvin, what's going on? Welcome. You're on with Rich Valdez.
Hey, Rich. How's it going? Thanks for having me on.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
I've
Thank
never
you.
called a radio station before, but as a former broadcasting student, I appreciate the medium and appreciate what you're doing.
Oh, thanks.
Had never listened before, but I tuned in after work tonight and thought it was really refreshing and kind of the very grounded take that we need more of right now. So appreciate your show. Like I said, it's my first time even listening or calling in, but
well, amen to that. What did you hear that piqued your interest and sparked the desire to call?
Well, I was listening to when you were talking. I wasn't, taking notes and as dialed as I wish I was, but when you were talking about the legal cases that Trump is facing, and you brought on an expert to talk about some of the situations, and the part that kind of piqued my attention, though, was when you were kind of talking about the friends or folks in your life that may be conspiracy oriented when it comes to Trump and are waiting for him to save the day. And that's something that I kind of have faced in my own life. And so it's interesting to hear that someone else dealing with that. So I always make the joke that my parents' generation loses their parents to dementia, but my generation is going to lose ours to misinformation and conspiracy.
Yeah, this is a serious thing. And the reason I mention it, I can't double down on it because nobody's really calling here. And, if they did, we'd have more in-depth conversations about that. And you're bringing it up, so we're going to have that conversation. But the issue that I have is my whole angle in all of this is for everybody listening to be a lot more informed, right? And to be equipped with not just opinion and the ability to debate somebody and win, but more so with fact, with understanding our Constitution, our founding. To me, that's always the crux of the matter. You have to stand on something, right? Like the old saying, if you stand for nothing, you fall for anything. And ultimately, good arguments come easily, right? We hear them all the time, right? For example, the pro-life, pro-choice argument. It's a very effective argument, very effective to say, but it's a woman's right to choose. Most people stop and pause unless they've already, played it out in their head and they've made their choice. Or even, guns don't kill people, people kill people, right? The other side of that debate, they're always, well, what do you need an AR-15 for? What do you need this for? Why would you need a semi-automatic? Because they frame these arguments in different ways, right? So most conspiracy theories, in my opinion, are framing the argument the wrong way. The idea is not right and wrong per se. The idea is America per se. That's really what we're talking about. And I feel like this country is a complicated thing. We have an interesting past that I choose to accept. And I think others choose to either ignore or criticize. And you can do that. I think I can criticize aspects of our history. I can criticize aspects of our government. I criticize Joe Biden every day, and I love this country. So my thinking is that we don't have to. A preacher once told me, when you go to a sermon, you listen to a sermon, you don't have to take it all. You can chew the meat and spit out the bones. And I think that's the same way here. I understand people's desire to be right and to have right. They want to right a wrong. They feel that they were slighted in 2020 with an election that was improperly conducted with mail-in ballots. I get that. But I also know if I'm walking down the street and someone robs me, maybe there's a camera and maybe I get a description of the assailant and maybe the cops catch him or maybe not. I still got robbed. And that's, I think, a reality of life. Sometimes there is justice and sometimes there isn't. And I'm not sold, and maybe I'm a cynic and maybe I'm jaded, but I'm never sold on the notion that the good guys always win. Joe Biden's in office and he hasn't been impeached. So when I hear something like that, I think, come on. It's not because he's a Democrat. It's because he's really bad at his job. And he's still there. And the fact that Republicans have allowed that to happen, as well as Democrats protecting him and the media protecting him and this and that and the other. So I think, that's a reality of life. There's no justice there. The American people are suffering with inflation and this and that. And it is what it is. So when people approach me, like similar to you, I share your, I'll probably repeat your joke about, losing our older generation to dementia and our current generation to misinformation. I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think there's a lot of people that are just swept up in a new way of thinking. In particular, a group that I call the pro-Putin patriots, where they feel that, things that come out of Vladimir Putin's mouth are like gospel truth. And they'll criticize me and say that that no matter what Putin does, I'll always say he's the bad guy because I was trained by the deep state to say that he's always the bad guy. I wasn't trained by the deep state. I can smell communism. And I've learned enough about communism to know exactly how this guy works. And he speaks in a dialect that is very reminiscent to me of Hegel and Marx. It's very Hegelian or Marxist. And when you hear that stuff, you can't help but call it out. So when he makes the comments that he makes about the, you got to look at your country's problem with transgenderism, or you got to look at your country's problem with X, Y, and Z, or BLM, or this and that. He says that out of one side of his mouth, and at the other side of his mouth, he's making sure that the GRU and whatever other international spy agencies he's got at his disposal, or hackers or whatever, are putting out tons of information and misinformation and people, assets to actually make sure that that's exacerbated on the ground in the United States. And this has been going on for 100 years. He's learned this tradecraft from those that came before him, from Stalin and Lenin. This has been their plan to destabilize this country for more than a century. So I know that, and I've read about this extensively, but I think most people haven't. And that's why they think, Putin's a great guy, and when he's bringing up all the problems here. Of course he is. He's creating half the problems here. So that's part of the angle that I take on that, Kelvin.
Right. I appreciate that outlook on it, because I think I fall in a similar way, and I don't think a lot of these people realize, particularly that kind of older generation, middle age to older, that almost like social media and the availability of information in air quotes, right? Being able to just read about these topics. Yeah. They're not trained in the checks and balances of disseminating information, right? So like they see a post on Telegram or whatever page, and it could be a random user that just posts, right? Twitter especially is bad for that. And they'll show it to me like it's gospel, and I'm like, Mom, that's a random person. And I think part of that is what you're talking about with Putin. I think there's a direct effort for misinformation. Like the Russian state has to be aware of what's going on with how that works in our country now, because there's definitely not just double agents. I mean, like bots and social media presences being put out by these countries to destabilize a little bit. And it's working because you have people, middle class Americans that are felt robbed in 2020, and they see something they like that says Putin's a good guy, he's going to fix things, and there's going to be martial law to take out the bad guys, and Trump is actually still commander-in-chief. They buy into it because it gives them the answer they're looking for. And I would not be surprised to find out that that's heavily Russian and Chinese influenced.
And Iran. Iran has a very massive disinformation push in our country. And you're right. And the reason people do that, you know why? Because they're good-hearted people. And it sounds like the best way forward. And it sounds like right in a wrong situation. And they're regular people. These are people that are good-hearted, that wake up wanting to love their families and live their lives. And I do those things. I'm not always good-hearted, though. And I realize I've worked in a swamp, and I know the players and what they're capable of. And when you are more informed, I guess, or have different information at your disposal, you realize, man, there are bad people that are really looking to brainwash us. And the innocent people that are being brainwashed it's a terrible thing. But it's because of their own kindness. It's because of their own willingness to see a better situation in our country that they begin to subscribe to these things. And I don't feel like a warrior against conspiracy theories. There's times where I think I can't lose all of my friends and family to thinking Trump is still the president. Kelvin, I got to run because of the break and the clock here. But a great conversation. I hope you keep listening, and I look forward to you calling in. Big shout out to everybody in Logan, Utah, KVNU. Don't go anywhere.
This is America at Night with Rich Valdez. Call now, 833-4-VALDEZ. That's 833-482-5337. 833-4-VALDEZ. That's Valdez with an S. America at Night with Rich Valdez.
All right, America, welcome back. We're going to continue with the rest of your calls. The phone number is 833-482-5337. I see that Count Delacula, our call screener, is in the control room screening the calls right now. Calls from Delaware, calls from Idaho. It's a short segment, so I don't want to cut you off, and I want to give you some time to be able to get your thought out there. And I don't want the music to trample your thoughts, so I'm not going to do a call here because we're out of here in like 40 seconds. But I do want to talk a little bit about the culture wars, because we have these culture wars that we're constantly engaged in, and we're slowly normalizing the idea that people can claim to be whatever they want to be, and that seems to be okay. And it's almost like gone are the days where if you say you're a choo-choo train, that we're supposed to go, oh, okay, and we're not supposed to say, are you mad? What is wrong with you? Anyway, folks, we're coming right back with your calls. Like I said, 833-482-5337. It's Open Phone America with me, Rich Valdez, and I'm looking forward to that. And if you chime in on social media, I'm checking those during the break. So looking forward to hearing from you. Don't go anywhere. Coming right back.
So glad to be on your show, Rich. It's just an amazing broadcast that I hope the rest of America listens to every day.
America at Night with Rich Valdez. Call now, 833-4-VALDEZ. That's 833-482-5337. 833-4-VALDEZ. That's Valdez with an S.
Your daughter is being accused of being a boy playing girls basketball.
That's what Al and Rachel Vanderbeek were told when school officials showed them a Facebook post featuring their daughter. Utah State Board of Education member Natalie Klein posted with the caption, girls basketball, ... And
I started reading some of the comments. I mean, they were just disgusting.
The parents believe Klein insinuated their daughter is a boy.
To look at someone's outer appearance and make an assumption that they are either playing in the right arena or not, based on the way someone looks, I don't think is appropriate.
The couple describes their daughter as a tomboy.
She cut her hair short because that's how she feels comfortable. She wears clothes that are a little baggy. She goes to the gym all the time, so she's got muscles.
They told her about the widely circulated post, which Klein has since taken down.
We just took her in another room and just started telling her the truth. We read her the post.
Klein posted a response saying multiple concerned parents shared the picture with her. She wrote in part, quote, "My deepest apologies for the negative attention my post drew to innocent students." Klein went on to say, "We live in strange times when it's normal to pause and wonder if people are what they say they are because of the push to normalize transgenderism," end quote. The Vanderbeeks said they're disappointed Klein posted the picture without fact-checking.
I really think that she should resign.
They said their family is rallying around their daughter, but not every child has that support.
I mean, worst case scenario, she could have ended her own life.
They have a message to other families experiencing bullying.
And I want all the kids to know that it's okay to just be who they are.
That is a report from the NBC affiliate in Utah, KSL. And let me tell you, this is a very interesting story. I would hate for this to happen to my kid. And I think that this is one of those things that it's unfortunate, right? It really is unfortunate to hear that your kid gets called, any name, right? But it happens. And I think we have to be, I think we need to be a little bit, I don't know, what's the word I'm thinking here? Compassionate, maybe, prudent is maybe more the word I'm looking for. I don't think that should happen, right? I don't think you should tell anybody's kid that they're this or that unless you know, right? Unless if they tell you, I would wait for that. I would wait for somebody to say, well, I identify as a cat, or I identify as trigender. Then you say, you know what, take you and your trigenders and do, you can do whatever you want to say after that. But don't presume that someone is a cat or trigender or a boy or a girl. And I think it's okay. Let me reverse. I think it's okay to assume if they're a boy or a girl. But that wasn't the case here, right? They accused them of being transgender, and I think that's a step too far. But hey, it is what it is. I think it's one thing if, my big brother does it, right? He's one of those guys that always makes an off-color remark. But when you're a school board member, I think you're, and I am a school board member. I know that I would never do that. You're looking for problems, and I think he's found some. So if all he walks away with is resigning, good. Hopefully they don't come after him and try to cancel him and, all the rest of the stuff that could happen. And that's what happened here. But anyway, that's Natalie Klein, a member of the Utah State Board of Education, posted earlier this week on Facebook a flyer of a high school girls basketball team in Salt Lake City, writing girls basketball. So I guess they drew the inference that this wasn't a girl. By just writing girls basketball, I don't know that yeah, and there's an ellipsis after it. I mean, I guess that could be inferred, but to me it seems a little bit ambiguous. I'd love to hear from Natalie Klein on this. I'd love to get her response. If we could find her, that'd be great. If she's available, call in. But the teens' parents, you heard their interview, and they were heartbroken. And maybe this is a horrible misunderstanding, but it's unfortunate either way. It really is. And what's more unfortunate, this reminds me of the stuff that happened in last spring, like April 23 or even June of 23, where there were these videos on TikTok and Instagram that, you had one person, a mom, that was, complaining about she was going to sue the school because her son identified as a cat, and that you could not, tell my child not to lick their fingers, and the teacher was telling them not to lick their fingers, and she got all upset. She wanted to sue. I don't know if you remember that, but we've got the audio. Listen to this.
Identifies as a cat, and his school is not taking that seriously, and I am honestly planning on suing them. So yesterday was the first day of school, and during class he was licking his paws, and his teacher told him to stop, and he didn't. So she called me and she was like, hey, you have to get your son to stop doing this during class. It's really distracting to the other kids. And I was like, I'm not going to tell my son that he can't express himself. I have raised my son to be who he is. And I just think that it's really sad that these schools are trying to indoctrinate children and, putting them in this mold to make them think that they need to act like a human, whatever that means. He's not a human. He's a cat. Anyway, I am planning on suing them because they don't accommodate for him. And I just want to know if there's any other parents out there that are having this issue, because we can put together a class action.
Espérate. Wait a second. So I've raised my son to be who he is. So you've raised your son to be a cat? And now, if you did, is he a boy cat or a girl cat? I don't know. But I can tell you, if somebody starts licking their paws like a cat would, real slow and feline-ish, if that's a word, I'm going to ask something. I'm not just going to pretend that's okay. I'm not participating in your psychosis. If you raise your son to be a cat, then you should get a kennel and send your kid to cat school. But don't send him to the school with my kid, so my kid can come home now licking his paws. Imagine that. You're at the dinner table and your kid just starts very slow and finicky and feline-like, just licking their paw as if they were a cat. I'm losing my mind now just reading it and listening to it on the radio. Imagine that actually happening in your home. And then she says the school's indoctrinating the kid. I love the rhetoric. This is fantastic, right? The school is indoctrinating you to think that you're a human. And I'm not going to sit here while my son doesn't get to express himself. Do you hear how crazy that sounds? I mean, look, there's one thing about self-expression, and yes, it's a First Amendment right. But there's also something about condoning crazy. There's also something about encouraging child abuse. This lady's clear mental issue is unchecked, and now we're allowing her to be mental with her son, who thinks he's a cat because of her crazy. And forgive me for lack of a better word. But she's making her problems his problems, and they're trying to make it everybody's problem. I think we should just help people. I don't know. You let me know what you think. Your calls are coming up right now. 833-482-5337. 833-4-VALDEZ.
This is America at Night with Rich Valdez. Call now, 833-4-VALDEZ. That's 833-482-5337. 833-4-VALDEZ. That's Valdez with an S. Valdez. Call now, 833-4-VALDEZ. That's 833-482-5337. 833-4-VALDEZ. That's Valdez with an S.
All right, it's Open Phone America here on Rich Valdez, America at Night. And I want to go to Bedford, Indiana, WBIW, and check in with our friend Sarah. Sarah, you're on with Rich Valdez. Go right ahead.
Hey, great show as always, and that clip you played about that woman whose kid identified as a cat, that is utter craziness. I don't know, maybe that woman's trying to save money so she can take her kid to the vet and save some money, but I guarantee no vet's going to see the kid and say, oh, yeah, you're a cat, I'll treat him, you know. And by the way, licking your hands and then handling pencils, papers, you know, shaking hands with other kids, I mean, that's really unsanitary, so the teacher has every right to say, don't groom yourself. And, you know, that mom is just going to make that kid a mental wreck by entertaining that kind of fantasy. And it's really destructive to the kids. And I just don't see where these parents could all let their kids identify as whatever they want to be and just going along with it. It's just getting crazier every day.
Yeah, you know, Sarah, I think you're right on this one. And again, this happened, I think, last summer, and it was crazy then. It's crazy now. It just reminded me of what's happening with this other case, and I'm looking at this, and I think, you know, I know you work in the school system. Do you see this in the schools in your area?
Thankfully not. I have had people, worried parents, ask me, do they have litter boxes? And I say, no. Our school system is pretty conservative, and Indiana has a law that if your kid identifies with the opposite gender by law, they have to notify the parents, which I think is a good law. The parents should know what is going on with their kid's mental state. And that's what I tell people. If you really want to know if these rumors are true, if they're having litter boxes, just ask a member of the custodial staff. I don't ever see that flying. That is just so unsanitary. Cat litter is heavy, it's nasty, plus the kid would have to go to the bathroom, and it's crazy. So I don't know if there are any schools that are doing this. Our district, thankfully, is not entertaining that craziness, but if you really want to find the bottom of the truth, just ask someone who's a custodian at a school, hey, to let the kids use litter boxes, and that custodian will tell you the truth. And thankfully, we don't have that madness here.
Amen to that. I never thought I'd be thankful to say that we're not allowing litter boxes in public school bathrooms. But I am. I'm actually very grateful that that's not happening en masse, right? The last thing I want to hear is that lots of little kids identify as cats. That would be crazy. Anyway, Sarah, thank you for your call and your thoughts on this one. Big shout out to everybody listening in Indiana on WBIW. And when we come back, we're going to talk about Biden, the documents, and more. Don't go anywhere.
This is America at Night with Rich Valdez. Call now, 833-4-VALDEZ. That's 833-482-5337. 833-4-VALDEZ. That's Valdez with an S. America at Night with Rich Valdez.
President Biden, something the special counsel said in his report is that one of the reasons you were not charged is because, in his description, you are a well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory.
I'm well-meaning, and I'm an elderly man, and I know what the hell I'm doing. I've been president. I put this country back on its feet. I don't need his recommendation. It's
How
totally
bad is your memory, and can you continue as president?
My memory is so bad I let you speak.
Oh, you got to love that one. Biden was sharp there in that retort. My memory's so bad I let you speak. That's Peter Doocy and President Joe Biden trading some barbs there over why he wasn't charged in the documents case. And again, one of our legal analysts earlier in the evening pointed out that this is dangerous precedent that we would set to say, you know, we're not going to charge you for a crime because you're old and you just, honestly, it seems like you don't remember and you're a well-intentioned person. I don't think that that should be the criteria. And I'm not saying to put 80-something-year-old people in prison for everything. But I am saying we have to have a better standard than just saying, I don't think he remembers. So even if he committed the crime, he doesn't remember. So we're just going to keep it moving. And let's, give Trump the electric chair. Right? It's just a very uneven standard of justice here. And again, uneven standard of justice means no justice at all. And Biden, he continues. He doubles down on how good his memory actually is. Listen to this.
Your memory has gotten worse, Mr. President?
My memory is not good. My memory is fine. My memory, take a look at what I've done since I've become president. None of you thought I could pass any of the things I got passed. How'd that happen? I guess I just forgot what was going on.
I got to tell you, I like it when he gets feisty. I'd get feisty, too, if I was him. And I don't like Biden in the least, but this makes for great radio. It gives us good audio clips to react to and to get your opinions on. But you look at what's going on with Joe Biden, and he's just doubling down. He says that his memory is terrific, and he's got reporters. I think that's the big story here. Reporters are asking the president how bad his memory is. What they really need to be asking is this the result of 2 open cranial surgeries that you've had because of the aneurysm and the other thing he's had going on in his brain? And that's a real thing, right? Those things cause some short-term damage and long-term damage, some associated memory loss. The aphasia, that's where he kind of stutters, can't find the words, he gets lost. It's not necessarily all dementia, but I will say, and again, I'm not a medical professional and I'm not diagnosing him. I've seen this happen to my dad, who suffered a traumatic brain injury and had something called TBI, traumatic brain injury related dementia. And I saw this happen to my dad where he couldn't find the words. They call that aphasia. He would get very frustrated because he couldn't find the words. And, that's when we see Biden do that with the thing, right? He gets angry and he says, the thing. I'm not faulting him. I'm just saying I would not elect my dad to be president. God rest his soul. I I'd probably hire my dad to be a security person, a hitman, but not president. There's too many things to think of there. And if you can't think of things quickly, accurately, and sharply, and if you lost that recall ability and mental acuity, then what do you do? Well, you go with somebody who has it, right? Like El Trompito, Donaldus Magnus, the 45th president of these United States, pretty well positioned right now to become the 47th president of this country. But anyway, Biden, after doubling down, I'm going to play for you. These things come about because of something that he said, and this is what I want to play for you, because he ultimately he fumbles things and he forgets things, and that's what prompts the media to ask these questions. Listen to what he says about the president in question here, and in this one he's talking about the let me see, what president is he talking about? Egypt. He's talking about the president of Egypt, but he confuses him with the president of Mexico. Listen to this.
I'm of the view, as you know, that the conduct of the response in Gaza, in the Gaza Strip, has been over the top. I think that, as you know, initially, the president of Mexico, Sisi, did not want to open up the gate.
He didn't want to open up the gate. Let me tell you, this is a tough predicament to be in. Paul in Boise, what do you think about what's going on with Biden? Quickly.
He's in trouble, and we're all in trouble because he's in trouble.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Just before I got on, you know, he's got those surgeries, and it creates scar tissue, and it creates problems on top of that when you're talking about the cranium underneath the bone of the skull. And it's a disaster waiting to happen. I hate to say it, but, you know, I lost my confidence in him about the first day that he was getting sworn in.
Yeah, I think you're right. After the swearing in, I think a lot of people became concerned, Paul. Big shout out to everybody listening on the app or the website, Rich Valdez, AmericaAtNight.com. Paul, thank you for your call. Thank you for everybody that called in today. Great conversations tonight. And yeah, Joe Biden's forgetting stuff. He's got documents all over the place. He's blaming everybody else for what's going on. You know what I say? Until the next time. Hasta la próxima, folks. It's been great being with you, America. Take care, good night, and God bless. I'm Rich Valdez.